Hello, I'm Matthew Villa, and welcome to the In the Style Of series. Today, we'll be reverse engineering the sound of Justice, with a special focus on the production tricks they revealed in their Mix with the Masters masterclass. Here's the demo project we'll be exploring. Pedro Winter, founder of Ed Banger Records, has a quote that perfectly encapsulates Justice's production philosophy. Quote, "Justice were born at the wrong time. They are stuck in the 70s or 80s, but they have to use modern tools to produce their music. This paradox is what gives them their unique sound." End quote. In their masterclass, Justice also mentioned that they don't approach mixing as a way to clean up and separate sounds. Instead, they focus on blending sounds together, making them feel hazy, alive, and organic. You'll notice me leaning into that concept throughout this video. Let's kick things off with their iconic Synth Bass. I used the free VST Vital to create this patch so anyone can follow along. The patch is built using stacked saw waves, along with filtering phaser and flanger effects to shape the tone. All of these presets are included in my Justice sample library, available on Samples by Vanity. Here's how the synth bass sounds. I won't go too deep into the synthesis here, since I already covered it in detail in a tutorial 6 months ago. Instead, I'll focus on what's changed, the processing. First, this EQ helps sculpt the frequencies to better match the original. As you can see, a significant boost in the high end was needed. Next, the phaser flanger effect adds width and a bit of blurriness, set to a 26% dry wet. Then, I run it through a few Sound Toy saturation plugins to add colour and grit. To push that even further, I'm applying about 9 decibels of hard clipping for extra tonal character. After that, a compressor applies mid to strong compression. The clipper and compressor work together to flatten the dynamics, shaping the synth into a sausage-like waveform, making it sound thick and consistent. The clipper also adds a touch of distortion, giving it a dirtier, more alive feel. Following that, a low-cut filter carves out a space for the bassline. Here's an A/B of the processing chain. Then, I have 3 instances of Soothe acting as a sidechain to the strings, snare, and kick drum, respectively. Using Soothe for sidechaining means that only specific frequencies are reduced, rather than ducking the volume of the entire synth. This helps with mix cohesion, though it's not something Justice would have done. The first major insight from Mix with the Masters was how Justice processed their synths. This came up in the context of their track Neverender with Tame Impala, but they also mentioned a key tool they used on Cross, and revealed that Cross was mixed entirely in the box. Justice used Melodyne Studio to create many of the glitchy chops in their music. They love Melodyne's built-in compressor labeled Dynamics, and frequently use the resynthesizer and emphasis functions. Their goal is to take synth chops and transform them into something unplayable, something that couldn't exist naturally. Tame Impala noted in the masterclass that this approach makes the listener respond differently because the sound feels more futuristic. The excitement comes from the unnaturalness. The holy grail is finding the sweet spot between something real and expressive and something warped and alien. Justice's workflow begins with a synth phrase they like, throw it into Melodyne, switch the algorithm to polyphonic sustain, and experiment with its many options. They emphasize that Melodyne's parameters give the sound a distinctly digital, futuristic texture, which they even apply to drums. For Cross, a key tool they used was Metasynth, which helped them generate alternative versions of synth lines. An example from Hyperdrama is the breakdown in Neverender, where the song's chords, originally played on a Wave PPG synth, are run through Matherdine to create an alternative yet familiar variation. I experimented with this workflow in Matherdine, making subtle tonal adjustments to the synth. The final touches were the pitch bend drops and reverb automation that cuts to silence, emphasizing the gaps and adding even more impact. All the drums here are samples from my Justice library, but I've left them slightly raw to demonstrate some of the processing I apply. Starting with the kick, which you can make a myriad of ways. I like Kick by Sonic Academy and Backbone by Steinberg. It sounds fine, but it's missing low-end weight, so let's fix that. I'm using the Bob Power trick, which I've covered in a separate video, to shape the kick drum like this. Then I'm adding R-bass to introduce harmonics at this specific frequency, but the real heavy lifting is done by the Pultec EQ. So we go from this to this. I also laid in a dirty sampled hi-hat, similar to the one in the original track. This adds some extra top-end presence to the kick. The last touch was a reverse leading into the kick. I made this by bouncing the kick, reversing it, and chopping off the tail. It's subtle, probably not even noticeable in the mix, but Justice did this in Phantom Part 2, which you can hear by splitting the track into stems. The snare didn't need a drastic transformation. I just added some spectral transient shaping with Spiff and a 10 kHz boost using Mag EQ. That 10 kHz boost is really what helps the snare cut through the mix. Here's the difference it makes. Without those frequencies, the snare just disappears, which is a perfect example of why mixing too much in solo can do more harm than good. The snare you just heard is also laid with the clap sample from 50 Cent's In Da Club record, which is actually true to the original track. I've positioned the clap slightly ahead of the snare to create a lead-in. Here's how that sounds. And finally, I added a short burst of white noise. I think the original has something similar, but I could be wrong. I split the original track into stems and couldn't hear any hi-hats or additional percussion, just the occasional tom hit. However, Justice have mentioned that they love sampling old drum breaks or coming up with unconventional percussion ideas, like the glass bottle they used in Hyperdrama instead of a triangle. So I've added a sampled and chopped hi-hat loop, even though it's not in the original track. For group processing, I'm using a clipper, an SSL compressor, and another instance of Spiff. The clipper and SSL are doing most of the work. I'm utilizing the Dr. Dre trick on the SSL, slowest attack, fastest release, which brings up the tails of the sounds, helping them sit forward in the mix. Here's everything together. On their own, they don't sound great because of the heavy clipping on the kick, but that's exactly what helps them cut through in the mix. The hardest part of the bass was figuring out the melody. It's probably still not perfect, but here's what I've got. The original uses a bass guitar, which I neither play nor own, and most of the bass libraries I found were pretty weak emulations. So I went with a simple synth bass from Analog Lab 5. I'm using 4 plugins on the bass, which can be grouped into 2 categories. The first 2 add weight at 60 Hz, similar to what I did with the kick drum, reinforcing the subharmonics to fill out the low end. The next 2 are for control, keeping the bass line at a consistent volume so it doesn't jump around between notes. Here's an A/B comparison. And finally, I've set up a sidechain to the kick drum, making sure the bass moves aside to let the kick punch through. The strings are the simplest element in the track, just 2 different disco string stabs from the Vengeance libraries. Since Justice used samples in the original, I figured it made sense to do the same. Processing wise, I'm shaping them to fit the mix and match the original. I had to cut a lot of the lows and mids to make space for the synth, while boosting the highs to help them cut through. Then, I'm running them through a compressor with around 10 decibels of gain reduction on the fastest attack setting. Just like with the bass, this keeps their level consistent, completely flattening the dynamic range. Here's an A/B comparison. The final 2 plugins are the same sidechains I have mentioned before. I've also sidechained the strings to the lead sound, so whenever the lead plays, it ducks the frequencies that would otherwise mask the strings. This just helps create a bit more separation between the 2 sounds. The last 4 elements are the vinyl and tape noise, the periodic white noise bursts, and the sample. For those of you still here, here's another gem from Justice's Mixed with the Masters masterclass, just as a little thank you for sticking around. Like I mentioned earlier, Cross was mixed entirely in the box, but Justice expanded on this, revealing their mastering chain for the album. They were limited to 8 plugins in Cubase, and followed a simple yet aggressive approach, stacking saturation plugins followed by a compressor. The order went compression, distortion, repeated again, making up a total of 8 plugins. The distortion plugin they used was Cubase's Quadrafuzz, which had multi-band capabilities that they used to shape the EQ of each track on Cross. For more insights into a similar production style, check out this video where I break down the magic of Gesaffelstein. Thank you for watching.